Thanks to Hollywood and blockbuster hits such as Jurassic Park, Godzilla, and The Lost World, dinosaurs have captivated audiences and paleontologists alike. But no dinosaur movie is the same without a giant flying reptile. You may recall a scene in Jurassic Park 3 where the characters are walking across a huge bridge inside this huge bird cage, and when they're walking across, a huge pterodactyl comes and picks up one of the characters and flies off, and there's a huge heroic moment to get him back. But what do we actually know about these pterodactyls or these pterosaurs? All we know is that they're reptiles that ended up flying, but how did they become reptilian aviation predators? The first pterosaur fossil was found in 1784 by an Italian naturalist named Cosimo Collini. Collini, along with other naturalists in the 18th and 19th century, were bewildered of what they actually uncovered. As for Collini himself, he thought that he discovered a huge seagoing creature that used its front limbs as paddles to soar through the seas. It wasn't until 1809 when George Cuvier suggested that pterosaurs were flying creatures and named the fossil pterodactyl. The term pterodactyl itself means winged finger. There has been many debates through the 19th century in which what kind of animal the pterosaur actually was. Many naturalists thought that the pterosaur was a huge bird, others believed them to be bats. But over time they came to one agreement, that pterosaurs might be, in fact, reptiles. The word pterosaur, in its Greek name, literally means winged reptile or lizard. But how did they evolve from land-dwelling lizards to soaring reptiles? Although there has been many theories, there is no actual evidence on how the pterosaur evolved at all. This is due to a fossil problem. First of all, there is just a tiny portions of all pterosaurs have been discovered. That's because it's really hard to become a fossil. After an organism dies, the fossilization process needs to be a fairly quick reaction. And the majority of time, only the hardest parts, such as the bones and teeth of all organisms, will fossilize. And due to the fact that pterosaurs were flying creatures, their bone structures were thin and light. Not a very good design if you want to become a fossil. Even though pterosaur fossils are rare, as are many fossils, they have been found globally. Even as continents drifted apart, pterosaur fossils have been found on every continent, including Antarctica. After insects, pterosaurs were the only animal to be able to achieve flight, and have ruled the skies for about 115 million years. In order for them to rule the skies, pterosaurs have developed a unique anatomy that allows them to take flight. Pterosaurs has a very distinct wing anatomy, unlike that of birds or bats. The wing membrane of a pterosaur is supported by a forelimb and one hyper-elongated fourth finger, which later comprises of at least half of the total wing length. To imagine this, if you were to remove your pinky finger and stretch out your ring finger to the entire length of your arm, that would be the length of your wing if you were a pterosaur, hence the reason behind the term pterodactyl, or winged finger. Not only was the finger elongated, but the legs were also quite long as well. The wings were formed by membranes of the skin and other tissues attached from the tip of the fourth finger to the sides of the legs or body. Although the wing membrane attached has been a highly debated topic by paleontologists. After the discovery of the pterosaur, their ways of flight have drawn major attention to themselves. How does a reptilian dinosaur with no feathers, small bones, and elongated features take flight? Let's start with the membrane of the wing first. The wing was comprised of a strengthening fiber called actinofibrils. Although unknown what actually comprised of these actinofibrils, they have been thought to be either a stiffening or strengthening agent in the outer part of the wing. The wing membrane also contained a thin layer of muscle and fibrous tissue. Another important trait to the pterosaur flight is their hollow bones. The outer walls of the bones were very thin, only about 2 to 3 millimeters in thickness. It's about the size of a credit card, and it was supported by a honeycomb-like filling, also made of bone. You can think of the pterosaur's wing much like a sail of a boat. The arm and elongated fourth finger act as the mast to the wing, and the wing acts like the sail, but instead of the sail gaining force to push it across the water, the wing is gaining lift to allow the pterosaurs to soar through the skies. The whole flight controls of pterosaurs are quite complex and quite amazing. Let's start with the muscles of the pterosaur first. In order to create a large downward thrust for the pterosaurs to take flight, the muscles need to be quite large. Besides the muscle fibers in their wings, pterosaurs relied heavily on their pectoral and breast muscles. A unique feature to pterosaurs is their respiratory system as well. Pterosaurs were thought to have a long air sac system that allowed flow through pulmonary ventilation model, much like birds. Their air sac system would have further reduced the density of the animal, making it lighter when in flight. The brain of the pterosaur remarkably resembles that of a bird's. The frontal lobe, which is used for the sense of smell of the pterosaur's brain, was fairly small, suggesting that smell was not very important to the pterosaur. And in contrast to the small frontal lobes, the cerebral hemisphere, which is used for the consciousness and cognitive activities, were actually really large, that like a bird. In contrast to reptiles, the pterosaur's optic lobes are in a lower position of the brain, almost beneath the cerebral hemisphere, and were quite large. As for reptiles, they are usually quite small and lie on a higher axis of the brain. This suggests that pterosaurs relied heavily on sight, and it was critical for them when in flight and hunting and catching their prey. There have been at least 60 different types of pterosaurs found to date, ranging in the size from a small cardinal to the wingspan of a modern fighter jet. The largest pterosaur discovered is the Quetzalcoatlus northropi, which stood as tall as a giraffe and a wingspan of 21 meters long. Most of the pterosaur fossils are mainly found near shores and marine rocks, which suggests that they lived by the sea or islands and fed on marine organisms and were likely scavengers. But it's possible for larger pterosaurs like the Quetzalcoatlus to have fed on small animals as well. Even though movies show dinosaurs and monsters with amazing effects, the audience never really understands the creature at all. Taking the pterosaur as a prime example. Pterosaurs were a very successful group of flying reptiles. They emerged some 225 million years ago and dominated the skies for the next 160 million years till they extinct at the end of the Cretaceous period. They spread across all continents, having no barriers whatsoever. They were an advanced breed of reptiles that evolved into a complex animal capable of flight, and the only animal to do so. They were a lightweight aviation marvel, an animal adapting to become the ruler of the skies.